Up next, we have Drew Evans. Drew is the Superintendent of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, otherwise known as BCA. In this episode, Drew and Chanda talk about the BCA's role in the criminal justice system, the laws and circumstances that can prevent justice, and how the BCA is trying to build community trust and transparency in its work. I hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the podcast, Drew. Very nice to have you here with me in a discussion.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, so, for the folks listening, would you mind just introducing yourself and saying what you do for a living?
Be happy to. My name is Drew Evans, and I'm the Superintendent at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. So in this role, I oversee all of our operations here at the BCA, which is really three large divisions. One is our investigations division, our state crime laboratory, our forensic science services, and then MINJUS, which is Minnesota Justice Information Services. And I've been in this role since 2015.
Yeah, and then you moved into that role you were inside sort of candidate into that role. So how long have you been at the BCA overall?
Yeah, so I've been at the BCA since 2005, and I was a police officer before that. I did get hired into our investigations division here at the BCA, and I started in our investigations division doing homicide investigations in the metro area primarily. And that group does homicide investigations, officer-involved shooting investigations, missing person investigations, abductions, violent crime type cases, assisting local jurisdictions. I then supervised the same group in southern Minnesota. So for us, the way we divide up, we're a statewide organization. And I basically had, if you drew a line through Lake Mille Lacs south and all the agents across southern Minnesota. And then I was the assistant superintendent for 3 years before this, which was the second in charge here at the BCA, and also directly oversaw our investigations division.
Wow. And then folks that work for the BCA, just to kind of lay sort of context, like how do they tend to arrive? Do they have a different sort of training in investigation than what, let's say, a peace officer on the street would have?
Yeah, so it's, one of the things that I'd like to let the public know about is that the BCA is about 500 people, professional women and men that do all types of different jobs at the BCA. That 500 number, only about 100 of them are sworn peace officers. So the rest of our staff are scientists, IT professionals, criminal intelligence analysts. We have a whole host of different roles that we fulfill for Minnesota. For our investigators or our agents here at the BCA who do our criminal investigations, right now, we hire all of them primarily. They were criminal investigators at a different agency prior to coming to the BCA. So they have a variety of backgrounds and experiences, but they are conducting criminal investigations as detectives at police departments, sheriff's offices, federal entities, and then they apply for the BCA, go through a fairly rigorous screening process. And we're really looking for the best and brightest and to come work with us, working on some of the most complex cases across Minnesota.
Can officers join the BCA that haven't been employed within our state?
Yeah, absolutely. So even in our current hiring process, which is not completed, so I won't talk about it specifically, but we have other individuals from out of state Minnesota that are coming here right now. Some of the good candidates from other states, they can really be in any law enforcement agency, but we do see others, the equivalents of the BCA in other states, often applying here, coming to work with us in Minnesota. And we have a number of agents that were employed by the same type of organization in a different state that now work for us.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that I was really interested in having this conversation with you, and actually it probably came to mind about a year ago when I was serving on the task force for police-involved deadly incidents, and you were advising to that. And there were a couple of sort of ahas that I had during that 10 months or whatever it was that we were together. And coincidentally, today we're talking on the day where we're going to be sharing sort of updates of what has happened since those recommendations came out. But it's really funny because for me, the BCA has sort of been a background agency until most recently when we've seen this elevation of police-involved deadly incidents. And then there was lots of cries on how it should be an independent organization or investigative sort of unit to avoid conflicts. And, I think I was probably on that bandwagon until I got to learn a little bit more in terms of how it functions. You have been leading during the evolution of how people have seen the BCA. Like, how has that impacted you?
So it's a really excellent question. And you're right. One of our values as an organization is partnerships. Oftentimes we're providing specialized expertise, resources, technical assistance to law enforcement throughout Minnesota to help keep their communities safe. As you noted, in particular with our work in officer-involved shootings, and in particular, Minneapolis and St. Paul, which are two cities that really didn't see our work because we were always providing that kind of background assistance, whether it's our laboratory or justice information systems. And so a lot of citizens did not see the work of the BCA and how it impacted their community until it was front and center in some very controversial cases. And what that's meant for us in a variety of terms, and from leading this organization through some of that, is that it required us to really create relationships and continue to work on relationships with community, in particular in Minneapolis and St. Paul, because there's people that don't know us and people that often had strained, challenged relationships with their own police departments. And one of the things that we're continuing to work on is to really help understand and differentiate. We are an independent law enforcement agency. The city of Minneapolis does not direct our investigation, and conflict investigations or officer-involved shooting investigations in particular. In those cases, we either say we will do everything and we do it with no direction from anybody else to conduct that truly independent, unbiased investigation in that process. But it really has created a situation for us as an organization where we really need to think about what is community to us? What communities do we need to make sure that we're strengthening partnerships with, not just our law enforcement partners, but really communities across Minnesota, and in particular, communities that may not have the strongest relationship with their police departments, so they really understand what our role is, because people didn't know what our role is. You're right. We really were a background organization that provided assistance to these agencies across Minnesota. And then we're front and center with a crime scene van in the middle of a tense situation. And that can lead to people not understanding our role. And that's our job, to really create those connections. So it's been an evolution for us, and one that's ongoing to this day. And it's led to things like hiring our first ever victim family and community services coordinator for Minnesota to help us do that work and flag blind spots for us as an organization.
It was a really sort of a proud moment around the table when we were listening to families that have been impacted. And I think it was Wanda Johnson and Valerie Castile that came in and just said, like, when there's a deadly involved incident, who's there for the family, right? Where do we get information? It's lacking. It could be better. And I remember just this right away movement with the AG, with Commissioner Harrington and you, to say we could add this position. So even before we finished, we had moved on that. Biff2 has done an incredible job. She was an amazing hire. But how has that position transitioned? And do you think that she could make a difference inside of a system where people have sort of concerns about its ability to serve the community?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. She's been a wonderful hire for us. And as you noted, we recognize the importance, even before the Deadly Force Encounters Working Group. This was a topic that we were exploring. But as you noted, we heard really loud and clear from families, and I certainly did, and Commissioner Harrington did as well, that this was a pressing need that just couldn't wait until we received even the funding to fund this position. So we adjusted internally, held different position open so that we could hire her and get her working on these very issues. I absolutely think she can make a difference. And the way she can make a difference for us is she is very much engaged in community conversations and different working groups in areas that we can't always be, depending on our role and what we're doing. And so she can be that conduit to really hear what the community is saying. She can hear from them what the needs are. She can hear from families and what they're experiencing. And one of those areas, just as an example, she heard loud and clear from families when she was working with them that they were really struggling to be able to pay for things like funerals when the family's impacted by a police-involved deadly force encounter. Same thing with mental health services. And so she was able to inform us at the BCA, Commissioner Harrington, and then Governor Walz. And Governor Walz has a proposal, Minnesota Heals, that's looking at actually the issue holistically. There's also counseling services for police officers to create healthy police officers to police in a way that they can come healthy to work every day, but also recognizing the needs of the family. And that's just one example that she pushed forward right away in communicating with our families across Minnesota. She also, on a regular basis, will be at meetings and will flag issues for me, for example, that we talk on a regular basis. And we set up her reporting structure very intentionally. She has a direct line of communication right to me, even in a large organization. And I probably meet with her at least once a week, once every other week, talking about different issues and way we can improve as an organization to meet those community needs. So, change and lasting change, I've always thought is incremental in some ways, but it's identifying those areas where we can improve and ultimately will lead to a better place of trust with our organization, really across Minnesota, and which in turn hopefully will improve trust with policing as a whole in our state, especially in some of the communities that do not trust policing in a way we would like them to.
Yeah. One of the other sort of recommendations that came from that report, and we had kind of a dynamic, tense conversations around that table. I mean, it was an unlikely bunch coming together. And, there were all kinds of points of views, and we probably would never sit together on any other occasion. But one of the topics was around this independent investigative unit and whether or not it should even be in the BCA. And where we landed collectively is that there could be a special unit inside of the BCA that was a recommendation. And from my understanding, it's been moved on. Can you share a little bit about what that is, how it will function differently or report differently?
Yeah, so the legislature funded, and it was really a direct recommendation from the working group to create an independent force investigations unit. As I advised your working group, that I have full faith and confidence in my investigators. They're professional women and men that come every day that want to just get to the truth of the investigations that they're working on. But I also heard very clearly that there is a concern about agents that are working on a homicide, which I did myself, one day in a community, and then I'm there investigating an officer-involved shooting the next day. Could there be relationships that are developed that may not lend themselves to be truly independent and unbiased? And I think we as an organization at the BCA can certainly understand and see that point of view. And so we supported the creation of this force investigations unit, which the legislature has now funded for a few years, but I'm confident the proof of the concept will work, and that it will be an advance in the way we do these investigations. And due to the workload associated with these cases now, it made sense to really focus on this very specialized type of investigation. And so we've already created the unit. We have a special agent in charge that's in charge of the unit. We have an assistant special agent in charge that is in the unit as well, and about 6 internal investigators that have moved into that unit, but then we're hiring an additional 6 outside people, and 5 currently, and we're still debating the last position. And they will be agents that focus exclusively on use of force investigations. Conflict of interest is what we call them, but if it's a public official, police officer accused of some other type of crime, and then criminal sexual conduct cases involving peace officers, which was also assigned to this unit. They're fully independent from the rest of our investigations unit. They're actually even housed here at our headquarters location, just adjacent to where I sit, which is kind of the administration side of our building, outside of our investigations unit. They're still sworn special agents that do this type of work, and they have access then to all the different resources, because for us as an investigation is not just the agents. We also have our crime laboratory, our crime scene team. We do a lot of digital evidence examination with body cams, video that we retrieve, video from different locations where we're at, from businesses, et cetera. But they will then work together as a unit, and we are stationing them all across the state so that even if our other agents need to assist on an investigation, all these cases will be led by somebody from that independent unit. And we are in the current process of hiring those others. We have 5 candidates identified right now that will be great additions with a lot of experience doing a variety of investigations across Minnesota. And it's important to us to ensure that we really have excellent agents in that unit that really understand the charge of what they're there to do. And it's to conduct those independent, unbiased investigations without any particular direction. And so I have confidence in them that they will do that moving forward, and that again will build further trust to say this is a unit even outside of the regular investigators that are working day to day with the agencies across Minnesota.
Yeah. What is the diversity of your staff in that unit? I anticipate I know the answer to that, but what does it look like and what intentional efforts are you making, both gender balance and racial?
Thank you. This is a great question. So Commissioner Harrington, if he was on this call, I steal his line, so that's why I have to reference him. He says, he's said it for many years since he was a police chief, that we should be reflective and responsive to the communities that we serve. And we very much believe in that here as well. And so that reflective, meaning that the racial and gender makeup of that unit should be reflective of Minnesota. I'm a little bit out in front of myself because those people have not been hired, but we'll be from a racial makeup of 28 to 30% people of color that will be in that unit. I'm questioning myself. I think right now there will be hopefully 4 women in that unit, which for law enforcement, which traditionally is around 10%, it's a real focus of ours. And when you ask about being intentional, we left the last position open in this unit because we want to ensure that we really are out looking for the diversity that we seek. And part of it is for us is that we're a statewide organization. So one way to look at race and gender is to look statewide, but you also need to look at where this unit is working. And so that we really are, if the bulk of the cases are in areas serving communities with larger populations of people of color, that we need to make sure that we have a larger population within our unit as well. And so we're really going to focus on recruiting, and we've been out doing that. We've been having conversations with people that we know are excellent investigators, and we're going to try to get them to come to the BCA. We also have a few options internally of some of our other agents of color that may consider going into this unit as well. But we certainly need to have people that want to be in the unit for the right reasons too. And so it's that balance of ensuring that we're reflective of both the genders in Minnesota and our racial makeup, but also ensure that we really have the right skill set too. And so we've been very intentional about that. I'm pleased with where we're at, but it's a continuous work that we need to undergo. I teach at a couple different universities, and it's been a challenge of the last year with some of the concerns about policing across the United States to really convince. I have a lot of students that want to go into criminal justice, but convincing them all that you really need to consider law enforcement is still a challenge for us and something that we need to be working on. Because for me at the BCA, and we've really challenged our investigations division, our laboratory, everybody, that while we're taking people that are currently investigators oftentimes or police officers, we still have a vested interest in moving high school kids and other people into the law enforcement pipeline, so that when they get to the phase where they can apply for the BCA, that we have that diversity that we're looking for in our organization. And so we've been planning and working. COVID's hit a little bit of a snag for us, but really getting out to even high schools and talking to high school kids to think about an organization that a lot of high school kids may not think about, so that they're thinking down the road and how we can give them the path to get to a BCA and what we can really counsel them in many ways. These are the steps you need to take career-wise so that you can be really an attractive candidate when you come and apply for our organization.
Right. Some of the community trust, I sit squarely sort of in the middle of that, personally. And, I've said I have family members who are police officers, and I've watched the treatment of them as African-American officers and how they're treated by the public in some cases. And then I've had a son who experienced getting beat up by the police and some other sort of harassment as they start looking like men. And then I chaired the Police Activities League board, right? Like my emotions are kind of all over the place. But I do think that there is a fair sort of point from community and of we recognize, or at least I recognize, I'll speak in eyes, that there will be some situations in which officers need to defend themselves, and it may result in a death. The videos that we have seen, and especially the ones locally with Philando or others, it doesn't end up resulting in the type of justice that we would expect to have happen. Is that a matter of the investigation? Is it a matter of the law? Is it a matter of like the blue code? Like, what is your assessment of that?
Really excellent, complicated question. For us at the BCA, our job is to get to the truth as to what occurred. That's really our role. Investigate, present the facts, go to a prosecutor, make a determination. Now, I think the conversation that I often hear is that there's certain conduct by police officers that the community just doesn't feel is appropriate. And appropriate, that's not even the right word, meaning that it should be unlawful. It should result in punitive measures. In other words, it broke the law. Whereas we had a law then that we're looking at that has now been changed. The actual use of force law has been changed in Minnesota. And I think going through and watching that legislative process, that's what I heard loud and clear, that people felt there was certain conduct that was not resulting in criminal convictions of police officers that they wanted to ensure does result in a criminal conviction in these sets of circumstances, whatever it may be. And, the term, the difficulty with use of force cases involving peace officers is it's really, an easy decision when you see things like North Carolina, when you shoot somebody in the back running away from a police officer. Like that's a really easy in terms of that's, murder every day, all day long. When you have a law that says you can protect themselves from apparent great bodily harm or death, it creates a large gray area in terms of what results in a violation of the law. Meaning that from my perspective, in doing these investigations and overseeing them, there's a lot of facts and circumstances that are very much dependent on the investigation at hand. Our job at the BCA is simply to collect all that information and analyze that information, analyze the evidence, and then the prosecutor needs to apply the law. I think moving forward that the analogy that I've been using with the old laws is that think of a dimmer switch in terms of what is legal and illegal conduct. That can change depending on the facts and circumstances. I think the attempt with the legislature with this new law is to create more of a light switch, and meaning that this conduct is here, and that it's very clear when it's illegal, when it's not illegal conduct by a police officer. And we'll have to wait and see if that's how that law plays out, but certainly our analysis of it believes that it is narrowing the situations in which a police officer can use deadly force. So it's a matter of applying that law, to answer your question, by a prosecutor, but they are working within the law. And I think that generally speaking, the prosecutors were using the law that was available to them and then applying it to the facts. I'll also say that for many, many years, nobody was charged in this state. I don't know, prior to 2015, I don't know of a case that was charged criminally in Minnesota. And so I do think that they also, prosecutors struggle to apply a law that when it's in our criminal code, that the use of deadly force by peace officers, but then if they violate that law, you then switch to the murder statutes, the manslaughter, the murder statutes that are available to us. And it doesn't always fit cleanly into one of those statutes with an officer involved shooting just because of the nature of what's occurring. So I know you're hearing, without talking about current cases, you're seeing debates by prosecutors right now trying to reinstate different charges and trying to charge different ways, and some getting dismissed, appealing them to the court. Part of that is the reason is because the conduct by peace officers in these situations doesn't always fit cleanly into our criminal code.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so much in that. And I think it's important because, we're basically in legal strategy now, right? Like, the truth is there somewhere, but we're really in a point of legal strategy. But in terms of not just sort of the recommendations that came forward in our report, but would you be willing to share maybe other sort of reforms that that you've moved on of late, that you hope that can happen? Will you just share some of that with us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So another portion of the process that you were working on, but independently of the working group, is we went through a continuous improvement review of our cases. I think part of another portion of an organization to continually improve and build that trust and transparency is we need to be willing to look internally at our own work and make sure that we're measuring up to what we say we're measuring up to daily. And there were recommendations that came with that, and ones that we've instituted, and we're in the process of doing that. Some of that's from a policy perspective, but some of it's also very intentional work that we'll be doing going forward, having specific training plans for the agents that are assigned to this unit, going over from death investigation, which is often what we're doing, but also things like cognitive bias training, so that we're really looking at, are we being very open-minded in these investigations? Are we making sure we're not jumping to conclusions based on previous work that we've done and making conclusions rather than truly investigating fully along the board? We also continue to work, and we do this as an organization, racial bias training for all of our agents, so that we understand and recognize the biases inherent within all of us, and how does that apply to our work, and so that we really truly are being that independent organization, fully examining every case as we should. We've also worked on we've implemented a conflict of interest policy. There's about 10,000 or 11,000 peace officers in Minnesota, so it's a relatively small community. You're going to know people that are a part of these investigations. It's important that we recognize that, but we also then have a policy in place that we conflict out that agent from working on that case. And we have a process in place now that we did previously, but it was done informally. And so this is a formal process that we're working on now. We also, in interest of creating that transparency, will be posting all of our files online. That's part of the law as well, and it was one of the recommendations, so that the public has ready access to them. They'll be redacted, but we'll have access to that so they can see the investigation. They can see exactly what we did in all of these cases. We've also challenged our agents to make sure the community has answers as quickly as possible to really conclude investigations within 60 days. The investigation needs to be done correctly. So that's going to grow and shrink with time, but we set that deadline so that we're really intentionally moving through our cases so that we get that to the prosecutor. And we've created processes as well that you probably heard during the working group as well about being in contact with prosecutors early, often, and regularly, so that once they get the case, they're not also having to start from scratch, so that they can make an analysis of what it is and make a determination if they're going to decline the case, go to a grand jury, or charge the case in a timely fashion. We've talked about Beef too. Her work's really important to this unit. She's embedded with that. We've also worked on a number of different educational resources, and have a number in process right now to provide, really an overview of what we do, how we do it. There's no secret to our investigative process. I mean, there really isn't. And so the more we can communicate with law enforcement, the community, civic leaders across our state, that's a really good thing. We have revisions to our criminal sexual conduct policy, just a whole bunch of things we're really working on. And again, the work of these agents, they're very professional, and they know how to do these investigations, have for a long time, but it's constantly re-examining our work and making sure that we're doing things to ensure transparency in our work, so that things that we've always done, we make sure they're documented so everybody can see them. And then areas that we can improve, whether that's through our training process, whether it's through those connections with community groups, with civic groups across Minnesota. It's important that we're always working on that, and that's what we've been doing so far.
Mm-hmm. The length of time of investigation is interesting. It was one of my ahas during the meeting. And so we often hear release the videos when there are incidents and the public knows that there's a video. But it's not really one video anymore. And I guess I really did not think about the volume of evidence and how that's changed as a matter of sort of community reporting and other, Ring and all the things, home videos. So can you just shed a light on when can you release a video, and how has that evidence changed over time?
Yeah, so video has become really one of the most challenging aspects of these investigations, and mainly just due to the volume. In fact, I saw an email go out yesterday looking for help reviewing some videos, because some of these large events where there's, I shouldn't say large events, a large areas where there's a lot of police officers that may respond to a scene, we can sometimes have 300 plus body camera videos alone that we need to review in real time. And the reason is because they may not have been involved in the incident. It may not capture the incident itself, but we need to know, did they talk about the incident? Did they have a conversation with another officer or an involved officer? And so we really need to go through that to ensure the prosecutor has the full picture. Same thing from Ring doorbell. Think of everybody in every place I go now has video streaming, and it's a lot of video that we need to download, we need to preserve, we need to analyze, we need to review. Part of that process, in terms of when people say release the video, our job at the BCA really is to protect the integrity of the investigation, so a prosecutor has a full picture of what's going on and that they analyze that. To release a video in Minnesota while it's an active criminal investigation, it's a fairly limited area which you can do that, and it's to dispel widespread rumor or unrest. That's really what the legal threshold is. There's really, and a law enforcement agency can do that. So for us in these investigations, that really leaves the involved agency or the BCA. And from our perspective, it tends to be that the involved agency is often the most proper agency to do that, because they're the ones policing that community and the cry is coming from their community. And so as you've seen in a number of situations, whether it be Chief Arredondo or Chief Axtell, most in particular, have released some videos. They communicate with us. And really the only ask that we have is if there's key witnesses that we haven't interviewed to time that so that we can interview those witnesses. And the reason for that is that we need to know that when a witness that we interview, whether it's a peace officer or a citizen that may have observed a particular event, that their thought process is not in any way shaped by a video they may have seen online, because it's not their viewpoint, it's not where they saw the incident. We really want them to describe to us what they saw from their point of view. And so we work through that, but certainly our perspective at the BCA has been police agencies need to do what is best for their community when it comes to making a determination on whether or not to release a video.
Is there a standard or a legislative sort of mandate on how long the videos can be held?
So right now, video under our current Data Practices Act, that video is not public information until there is a decision not to pursue, is what the case says. So in other words, the case is closed. So what that really typically means, either once it's been presented in open court, it becomes public at that point in time, or if the case is declined for prosecution, it becomes public at that point in time. Otherwise, you do need to use that exception in the law to release that video. So this is certainly an area that I think more conversation can be had. Some states release all video after 30 days. Some do it after 60 days. Some do it right away. It really depends. And I think that this is one of those areas that we should continue to have conversations about as to when is the appropriate time for video in these incidents to be released.
Yeah. Do the families get any say on the release of videos?
So the families, for us, is our perspective with families really should be that they see it before it goes to the public, but just before it goes to the public. And so that is a topic that we've heard from a lot of families, that they would just like to see the video. The law really is fairly clear that it becomes public information. So if we show the family, we really should be showing the public. We absolutely always want to show the family before it becomes public, so they can be ready emotionally for what might be coming once that video is released. Because it's never easy for anybody to see deadly force of any kind used for anybody, and it's a traumatizing event for the public as a whole, and certainly for the family members.
Yeah. One of the other things that I learned during our time together was that there's not a database of officers that have been involved in deadly encounters. Are you in favor of that happening, or what is your point of view on that?
I think that's a interesting question. It really would depend on what the purpose would be for it. So I don't think there's any harm in knowing the people that have been involved in these encounters, but it can be challenging. I mean, as you've noted before, it could be a situation where, somebody's truly shooting at a police officer and they're defending their life in that process. If that happened more than one time, which has happened, are we unfairly labeling that police officer who truly was? However, we also know that a lot of police departments across Minnesota use early warning systems. And if we see one particular peace officer involved in use of force event after use of force event, it should flag for us that there could be a problem with that individual. So certainly there's attempts, I will say, with the peace officer discipline database that the Post Board is in the process of creating that may not be exactly on point with this particular, but that is the goal, is to identify, are there problematic peace officers in the state that are being disciplined on a regular basis so that the public has a better insight as to what's going on. And that I absolutely think there is value to. I have a law license as well. If I get sanctioned by the Board of Professional Responsibility, it's publicized, it's put on a website. You can search and see if I've had discipline. We absolutely, in this profession of policing, need to hold ourselves to the same standards as other professions have for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. And Drew, are you sort of a voice on those sort of early warning systems? It seems like it's a little bit outside of your purview, but and a lot of times when these officers get involved, there's basically sort of, in some cases, sort of like, we're not surprised. We have, so there's like so many things that aren't working before it even gets to you. And so, do you use your influence, or is it even important to be using your influence to figure out how to do that to stop more of this?
So one of the things from your working group that I'm a strong advocate of and that hasn't really moved is the concept of like an NTSB review. So the National Transportation, when a plane crashes, we really dissect that going backward and look for what led up to this crash. And the same type of concept really should be done in a non-punitive way to really identify where there's systemic problems within a police agency, with this individual, things that we missed along the way so that we can improve moving forward. We're not going to undo the particular event. We may move forward with a prosecution, an individual if it's against the law, but we also need to be thinking about how then do we improve systemically so we identify in those systems more quickly before we get to the point where something really bad happens. And we should want to do that. And I still advocate that would be a really good process that we could put in place that's really complicated, but that it would really put us in a better position to examine these. And that's really, from our perspective, where it is. Now, one of the recommendations from our report, our continuous improvement report, is to look for ways to identify if there are training flaws, if there are flaws within a system for the police agency. And we have done that informally if we see something up front that, really is a challenge. But it traditionally is not a role of ours in terms of pointing that out to the police agencies in particular, because our goal is to gather all of that evidence. But at the same time, we do have a unique view, and that's where items like this review board, there's a way for us to identify what processes might be put in place that could really get to those things that people are looking for while not compromising our real role of being that independent lens, gathering all the information for the case.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that you mentioned and we talked about right before we went live on the podcast was the pandemic and how we are just working, right? Like just in a very complicated time, just how me and you are showing up to work every day. But how has the pandemic, I guess I didn't think about, how do you do an investigation during a pandemic and how has it had impact?
So it impacts us, and it impacts us in a way that a number of agents have gotten sick, because for them, they just need to, the investigations go on and they're on the front lines with a lot of other frontline workers across our state. And so they've been doing that throughout. The challenge for us often becomes is that if we are working with somebody that's COVID infected and we don't know about it, due to the nature of our cases, we're often spending an hour plus with that individual. So even though we're taking all the proper precautions, we've had a number of agents exposed and get sick as a result of our investigations. However, our agents in particular were well suited for COVID in many respects because we work all over the state. They were always mobile. So we always were working out of a suitcase and out of a briefcase. And so they had all the equipment to really be able to work out of their homes, and then they come together to work. It's been a challenge for some of our other areas. Our laboratory in particular has to be here. The lab is here. And so they work out different shifts where they come and they do their analysis, and then they do all of their work at home when they do the report writing, analyzing the data, all that different stuff. So it's been a challenge, but at the end of the day, public safety has to go on. And so we have really a dedicated staff here that takes their mission really, really seriously. And so I couldn't be more proud of the work that they've done to really work within the confines of what COVID creates for us, but making sure that we really haven't missed a beat. In one odd way, it's been good for us because court has not been in session as much, and our scientists spend a lot of time driving all over Minnesota and waiting in courtrooms and testifying about their analysis. And so without that, we've been able to do more of this. It saves us a lot of drive time and go to court hearings remotely. And they've been able to then really get more work done than they would have. However, we're very concerned when courts open up fully again that we're really going to get backlogged. So there's going to be a downstream effect that's really going to impact our organization.
Yeah. Before we close, is there anything that you would want our listeners to know about the BCA that you think is either a misconception or anything that you would just want folks to know?
Yeah, so from a misconception standpoint is that I really do want people to know that while we provide a lot of assistance to law enforcement, we're independent of law enforcement. I don't report to any other law enforcement in the state. There isn't a hierarchy in terms of law enforcement. We're independent, and we're here to serve all citizens of this state, and we strive to do that in an equitable way, and we'll continue to work towards that and improve our work every day across Minnesota so that all Minnesotans really receive the best services the BCA has to offer. And I've often viewed our role as creating equity across the state in terms of making sure people have access to services. And while they may not see that up close, that's the goal of what we're doing. And what I mean by that is, an affluent community that could afford, for example, laboratory services, if they were to pay for them, shouldn't be getting better service in that community than, say, even I can use a rural example of Jackson County with 5,000 residents who could never afford to be having the latest DNA technology applied to those criminal investigations. And so that's how we always look at our work, is to make sure that those services are equitable across the state. I also would like to note for people that really we're a very broad organization. I opened by saying we have 500 employees, only 100 of them are law enforcement. And while we are a law enforcement organization, we provide a lot of specialized criminal justice services, from records to fingerprints to background checks. We conduct over 500,000 background checks a year through the BCA, to our broad spectrum of analysis in our DNA laboratory, to doing things like our fusion center that tracks all kinds of different information to keep people safe from terrorist attacks, to school threats, to faith-based institutions, and a whole bunch of different things that we're working on. But at the end of the day, our vision for our organization is to deliver exceptional law enforcement services for a safer Minnesota. And well, that's an aspirational goal, but one that we're chasing every day as an organization, and that we will continue to do, and that we want to engage with anybody who wants to engage with our work so that we build trust, transparency, and really be an organization that all Minnesotans can be proud of. And that's our goal every day.
Yeah, Drew, I really appreciate you taking time to be in this conversation with me. As we have entered, as we talked about, this incredibly complicated time, and with things that are upcoming, it was important for me because all of us we have a stake in the future of our state and our city. And there's lots of trauma and concern, and lots of citizens that are activating on how do we reform? How do we think differently? How do we reimagine? And I do think it's important for us to just lay a little bit of of facts and perspective on the table for people to absorb into their thought process. So I appreciate you being a partner with that. I didn't think I would. I don't like the BCA, and I came out of it like, okay, I have a renewed, expanded point of view. And I think that's really what this is about, is how do we bring information and just expand people's points of view. And so, again, thank you for your partnership in doing that. And it was just a pleasure. I'm very pleased with the progress we've made on the working group recommendations, and look forward to actually seeing you in just a little bit today.
Same to you. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the conversation.
Sounds good. Have a good day.
Thank you too.
That's Drew Evans and our host, Chanda Smith-Baker. And if you're like me, that's the first time of ever hearing what a BCA or who a BCA is. So thank you for that insight. And if you're listening to Conversations with Chanda on SoundCloud or Spotify or any platform, please make sure to subscribe. This is Supak Kienitz from the Minneapolis Foundation. Thank you for listening to Conversations with Chanda.